Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angie Kronenberg, and I'm the president of NCOMPAS. I am so pleased that you're able to join us this afternoon. We have Jill Springer. She's Senior Policy Advisor at NTIA, and she's going to provide us an update with all the really great work that NTIA has been doing to speed broadband infrastructure deployment. And we're also going to discuss a report released by the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society in September that's entitled Permitting Success, Closing the Digital Divide Through Local Broadband Permitting. We both had the privilege to work with a large and diverse group of stakeholders that led to this really great report. It provides some examples for ISPs and localities, but it also offers a lot of pragmatic solutions that we wanted to highlight. You know, the NCOMPAS membership and many of those who work with us are very familiar with the hard work of deploying a modern broadband capable network. And with the historic levels of funding from the Infrastructure Act for broadband, there already is and will be significant pressure on government agencies up and down the pipe, including local municipal agencies, to permit and approve construction. So these are really critical steps that we're going to be talking about so that we can maximize efficiency, we get fast and affordable builds. And I just wanted to note, I've got a number of questions for Jill this afternoon, but if you have a question you really want to ask, you can use the Q&A feature down below. You will see it right there on your Zoom. If you'd like me to ask a particular question of her on your behalf. So happy to take those. So welcome, Jill. So first, just wanted to learn a little bit about your background. How did you land at NTIA to work on this really important issue of permitting?
Great. Oh, well, thank you, Angie. Thanks to you and NCOMPAS. It's really great to have the opportunity to be here talking to you and your members today, and the rest of the audience. So I kind of re-landed at NTIA. I was at the Department of Commerce during the American Recovery Act, the Broadband Technologies Opportunities Program. And at that point in my career, a little bit more than a decade ago, I had a master's in historic preservation. I was the federal preservation officer and had other federal experience as well. After BTOP, I went to the Federal Communications Commission, and I was at the FCC working in the Wireless Bureau on infrastructure issues for about 10 years, also in the Office of Native Affairs and Policy. And one of my former deputy bureau chiefs was speaking to someone on the policy team at NTIA about what a big challenge permitting would be. And I was fortunate that my former mentor recommended that Nick Alexander give me a call. And so that led to my getting reacquainted with a lot of the same great people who were at NTIA for BTOP and are applying that experience to all of the Internet for All programs that we're administering right now.
Well, I think they're really lucky to have you back. So, and you know, it's such a great thing to have NTIA involved in so much of what's happening in the industry with respect to the infrastructure money itself. But as you well know, like there's so much investment, there's just private sector investment that's going into building networks right now. And so it really does have a downstream effect. The work that you're doing that's related to the Internet for All is also really helping across the board with all permitting that's happening, whether it's essentially being funded by the government or is also being funded by private sector investment. So thank you. And thanks for your public service. So you really hit the ground running. So catch us up on all the work that you have been doing to highlight these issues, and then, you know, work with the agencies across the board as we're preparing for a slew of permitting to take place as a result of the Infrastructure Act investments.
Great. With that, I am going to share my screen, and can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
love
perfect.
The color.
Excellent. Yes, Internet for All. So in terms of our progress, which we are very proud, it's been a super busy year and a couple of months. And you are right, I hit the ground running, but partially because NTIA began thinking about this from 2021 when the different programs started coming online. NTIA recognized that the challenge to fund broadband deployments in every state and territory, permitting would be a very, very significant challenge. BEAD, the Broadband Equity BEAD represents the largest amount of funding, $42.5 billion of almost $50 billion that NTIA is administering. And that program is funding broadband serviceable locations based on maps that the FCC is developing to identify all of the households across the country that need to have internet, and not only to have access to internet, but at reliable service at speeds that allow competition within the economy, and also are affordable. And so in terms of the deployment, we are going even more so than we did during BTOP, where we were going to rural and underserved areas. We are going to places that we are going to be encountering land managing agencies and localities that don't receive a lot of permitting applications. And so there's a whole range of challenges that are out there. So one of the things that we use as we talk to our federal partners and state and localities as well is this conceptual timeline, just to give a sense that we've got 7 different programs that are going on simultaneously. Some of the smaller programs, like the Broadband Infrastructure Program, are winding down right now. But we have 2 tribal programs. We have the Middle Mile program that have initiated permitting. And by permitting, we tend to refer to both NEPA and environmental review, as well as right-of-way and access permits and other authorizations. But what we have in front of us is potentially very daunting. On this conceptual timeline, you'll see that it is just in fiscal year 2025 that the BEAD proposals that we have received as of last year, and we are almost all the way through accepting, are going to turn into projects, and projects that trigger permit applications. One of the things that this graph can't convey is that it is not showing the true volume of the challenge that BEAD is going to provide. BEAD at $42.5 billion would be about 40 times the height of the curve for TBCP2. So, this is just a reality check. It's something that is humbling, and it helps me to wake up every morning, certainly thinking about permitting and trying to do everything that I can do to make this a little bit more efficient. So when I came on board, one of the first things that I did is to ask just about anyone who would talk to me at NTIA, like, so what do you mean by permitting? I know that sometimes when I speak to people, they will talk about the permitting process. And if there was only one permitting process, then we would not have the challenge that we face now. And from talking to various people, one of the things that I did is to organize our portfolio into 3 different work streams. And so the first work stream has been our priority over the past year or so, and that's NTIA's own NEPA and environmental approvals. Obviously, we have the most ability to influence that, and so we have worked really hard in this past year to make that as efficient as possible. The second area is other federal approvals. We all work for the same administration, and so we have done a whole lot of interagency collaboration to try to make sure that the federal land managing and permitting agencies are aware of how much funding the Internet for All program will be pushing out. But not only that, that they understand that we have a lot of experience from BTOP and the other broadband initiatives that we've funded, doing NEPA, doing environmental review for broadband. And one of the great things about it, in terms of at least the environmental side of permitting, is that broadband does not tend to have significant environmental impacts. And there are a lot of different options for avoiding, minimizing, or mitigating impacts when there are resources present. So we have been doing a lot of interagency work along those lines. And then the third area of our work stream is state, local, and private approvals. We have the least ability to influence those, but really absolutely recognize the challenge. It's one of the reasons, as we've discussed, it was so great to participate in that summit and to talk about local permitting. But what we try to do here is identify actions that we can take with the greatest potential universal benefit. And I think the summit we participated in and the paper that came out of that shows that that was a great decision, in terms of getting the right people into the room to talk about the things that will matter. On the state level, we've done things like collaborated with the Federal Highway Administration. We've held 2 different webinars with state DOT, permitting, utility coordinators, and environmental folks to make sure that they understand Federal Highway Administration's broadband rules. Some of them can be super helpful in doing things like waiving fair market value for broadband and clean energy projects. So we've done those webinars inclusive of both state DOTs as well as state broadband offices to make sure that everybody understands all the efficiencies that are possible out there now. So in terms of our work to make our environmental rules as efficient as possible during BTOP and prior to April of this year, NTIA has administered all of its funding programs using only 11 categorical exclusions that had been in place at the Department of Commerce since 2009. These categorical exclusions were helpful, but they certainly were not exhaustive. And again, understanding that we've never found a project that's required an environmental impact statement or really triggered significant environmental concerns. We worked with the Council on Environmental Quality to establish new categorical exclusions. And so we established 30 new CADXs. In taking the public comments for that rulemaking, we heard a lot of industry folks tell us that the categorical exclusions that the First Responder Network Authority and their environmental program had in place could be very helpful to BEAD and to the Internet for All programs. So we actually went ahead and adopted 6 of FirstNet's CADXs as well. The Fiscal Responsibility Act had some changes to NEPA that it made it easier for us to do that. And so that began a kind of one of our work streams where we are leaning into some of the national environmental review that FirstNet did. CADXs are the most streamlined form of NEPA review. It's not a full-on exclusion, but it takes significantly shorter amount of time, a lot less paperwork, and we have been pushing out a lot of technical assistance to make sure that people know what those CADXs are and hopefully plan their projects to qualify for them. So in our experience, in our past experience, the 2 elements of environmental review that can take the longest for broadband are reviews under the National Historic Preservation Act. They're also called Section 106 reviews, and reviews under the Endangered Species Act, which I'll talk about in a minute. But with my long history, one benefit of age, right, is I've been in a lot of the rooms where it happened. After the Recovery Act broadband experience, the White House OSTP asked industry, like, what was the hardest thing about trying to provide service to these rural and underserved areas? And unilaterally heard back, deploying on federal lands is really, really tricky. So the White House asked the ACHP back in 2015 to work on a program comment to make Section 106 more streamlined on federal lands. I at that point was at the FCC, worked with the other federal preservation officers. We developed a program comment that was issued in 2017 that is significantly streamlined process. Unfortunately, there just wasn't the volume of federal funding that was being pushed out there that this program comment was widely known about or used. But one of the first things that I suggested in coming to NTIA was that NTIA requests that the Advisory Council amend the program comment to make it applicable to all broadband federally funded or permitted projects on and off federal lands. And we were just thrilled to work with them. They recognize the challenge of the moment. I mean, they're balancing all of the, as you mentioned, all of the types of infrastructure that are going to be triggering these reviews, and agreed with us that these have relatively minimal potential. So in March of 2024, ACHP amended the program comment, issued the program comment for federal communications projects. We've developed some flowchart guidance to help in implementing this, but it has some efficiencies like establishing a very tight area of potential effect to reduce a lot of superfluous survey. It has presumed effect determinations, most of which are no adverse effect for almost all types of broadband deployments. And so great efficiency, a tool that we're going to be able to use in every state and territory. I mentioned also Section 7 consultations under the Endangered Species Act is another area where the linear nature of these projects can mean that you cross through areas that a number of different species or habitats might be in. And the presence of those species triggers the need to go one-on-one and talk to the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's a lot of permits, a lot of conversations. And so one of the things that we have been working on, and this is really exciting because I know Fish has never done anything like this before, is a national initiative. They actually have an online tool. It's called IPAC that will let folks proposing deployments go online, map out their project and see if there are any species. Usually if the answer was yes, there's species or habitat, again, you'd have to go to Fish and Wildlife Service. But they were building out efficiencies for projects like broadband, where if you ask a few questions, you might be able to eliminate the need for that face-to-face contact. They're called determination keys. So we've been working collaboratively with them. We actually funded 2 Fish and Wildlife Service positions, and the Permitting Council have provided some additional funding. We've done a pilot project in Texas, which is both receiving the most BEAD funding and also has a very high level number of species and amount of habitat there. So we're building these determination keys out to maximize the ability for folks who are receiving BEAD and other Internet for All funding to go online and finish their whole Section 7 review in under an hour. And that's going to eliminate 90 days or more of a consultation requirement. So I'm really excited. We're doing a lot of things that I feel like you mentioned, permitting generally, and that is something that we really have tried to do in our approach. The program comment is available to any federal agency that licenses or funds broadband. So RUS and others can use it, the FCC. The determination keys, similarly, will be available to anyone who's deploying broadband and triggers the Endangered Species Act consultation requirement. So, and I see that across the board because there is such concern about trying to simultaneously do as much infrastructure improvement as we're doing. This is just a slide, I don't want to reinforce again how scary permitting for broadband can be. But, I've talked a lot about different types of the federal permitting that we've been working on improvements for. But there, folks considering bidding on these projects also have to keep in mind the various state permits and state requirements for state environmental quality, hazardous waste, wetlands, so forth, and regional and local as well. To this end, an extension of the federal work that we've been doing is BEAD is divided into 7 different regions. And so my team identified all of the district and regional permitting agency representatives, because one of the challenges we had during BTOP is we had a lot of agreement in the headquarters level that broadband had minimal potential. We're going to do this as fast as we can. but that word really didn't make it out into the field, where people needed to know it. I mean, ironically, in some of these rural and underserved areas, it was because the federal lands themselves didn't have a broadband connection, right? So they weren't getting the word from headquarters. But we did a series of virtual meetings in every BEAD region with all of these permitting officials, folks on both the real estate and the environmental side, to make sure that they understood that this $50 billion was coming. And we actually have been using a lot of IT-based resources. So in the same way that the BEAD allocations are being driven by that FCC map, we overlaid all of the federal lands boundaries on the FCC maps and provided heat maps back to the permitting agencies to say, look, every time there's a dot in there, you're going to have at least one permit associated with that. And if there are dots adjacent, there's going to need to be fiber potentially coming down the road going through your forest. And so do you have people there to receive broadband applications? So we have provided those heat maps and then continued the ongoing conversations to prepare those agencies. One of the things that's been really cool since we established all those new categorical exclusions, we have other federal agencies who've adopted them to make sure that they can follow the same rules. So the Forest Service has done so. Our EHP lead and I just met this week with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Bureau of Land Management, and they're adopting them as well. So that is really good news for us trying, I think, to work together to make this as efficient as it can be for those of you who will be doing the hard work. Do not it will still be challenging, but we are trying to support you and really care. So along those lines, NTIA has a range of technical assistance. This is just one thing that I'll highlight. On the Broadband USA website, we have a permitting page, and a lot of the resources that my team has developed are out there. One of them is called a permitting needs assessment. This provides checklists for 4 different technical categories: pole attachments, rights of way, conduit access, and environmental and historic preservation reviews, that are just like a place to start. Like, what questions should I even ask myself to know where to begin? The resource also has some considerations about utility easements, access, and zoning approvals, and a glossary, because we are famous for acronyms and other unique terms of art that might not be that familiar to everybody who needs the information. So again, and then I will get back to your other questions, but I see this as a really unique moment where information technology can really benefit environmental review and permitting. And so when I said that we took the FCC's broadband serviceable locations and overlaid land managing agency boundaries, gave that information back to help those land managing agencies, my team started saying, like, well, how can we help people who might want to deploy? Because there is a ton, post-pandemic, there are a ton of data layers that are out there that inform the reviews that you need to do for NEPA. I mean, you basically could know a whole lot about what the challenges might be or what the permits might be in an area if we, NTIA, built out a tool that could help. And so that is how the permitting and environmental information application was born. It went live in March. It is available for free on our website. Basically, if you are thinking about bidding on a BEAD project, or if you're deploying broadband or really any other type of infrastructure anywhere, you can go, in a second, I'll show you the 2 ways that you can get to this resource. Using that ribbon on the top, you can specify the location that you want to zoom into, and then a series of tabs there allow you to identify federal land boundaries, tribal land boundaries, state lands, and then a whole range of environmental resource considerations that are part of NEPA. And our hope in putting this out there is that this is going to give you the heads up and the information that will allow you to know, in some cases, right, if I cross to the other side of the road, I may be able to avoid a land managing permit, right? Or
Right.
if I want to deploy here, it's through a wetland. So if I could go aerially on existing poles, I might not have all kinds of permitting complications. So this tool is out there. I really encourage that you go to it and play around with it. The two places that you can access it are on the Broadband USA permitting page, as well as on the National Broadband Availability Maps public GIS site. Two things about it. One is that when you come in, there's like an introductory paragraph that includes a disclaimer, just clarifying this is not NEPA. This is a tool to help you to
Yeah.
plan the smartest project to get through NEPA as quickly as possible. But the second thing is I am not very technically savvy. I'm a tech lover, not a technically savvy person. So we actually have included here a video tutorial of how you use this resource. It's just about 10 minutes long, but it's part of the mapping application. So with that, I will
Yeah.
stop sharing.
No, that's really great. So one of the questions we already have in the chat is, can we have a copy of Jill's slides? So Jill, I know you probably don't mind us sharing a copy of the slides with everybody so that they have it. And you'll see there's public information there in the public websites where you can get to this new tool that will help speed your processes along. And this is a lot of work. So congratulations. I mean, this is just listening to your 15-minute presentation and how the detail that's required and the number of conversations that's required. I mean, it's fabulous to see our agency that's working on these issues just doing so much to help with this process. So thank you, on behalf of the entire industry. I know you have been making the rounds, like to describe to people, this is now what's available, right? And it's one of the reasons why I really wanted to host you for this webinar, because I knew we had a different audience than some of the audiences that you've been talking to on a regular basis. Last week, we hosted our NCOMPAS show out in Denver, and we were so fortunate to have Sarah Blue, who has been leading on the Middle Mile program up until recently. And so I know that you've had some experience already with, and you have the travel programs going as well. So just wondering, what have you heard any specific feedback from those who are deploying in those programs, how the work that you have been doing is helping them, and maybe some additional areas that folks are asking for help on? Any perspective on that, Jill?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that is a little bit difficult is that many of those programs started before these tools started really rolling out in March. And so for example, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program Round 2 recipients will have the full benefit of these tools. Unfortunately, if you're already down the road, for example, working with the SHPO and other parties in a Section 106 review, you're probably already doing a lot of survey and stuff like that. And one of the requirements of the program comment is you have to agree going into it that that's the streamline rules that you're following. So unfortunately, the folks who are out there deploying right now are, we're in that kind of gray area zone. And so the new ones, as they come online, are beginning to implement this. It all, though, takes so much communication. So I've done webinars with the state historic preservation offices and the tribal historic preservation offices to make sure that they know what these tools are on the Section 106 side and what have you. I think when you mentioned Sarah, right, one of the amazing things is she is so incredibly adept at problem solving and always looking for, like, how can I leverage one good idea into benefiting the most people. So we just had a couple months ago, the joint cohort, the meeting of the State Broadband Leaders Network with the Tribal Broadband Leaders Network. And Sarah actually came to me and said, look, we've got a couple of middle mile providers who are utility companies who are pole owners. And I think we should get them on a panel to talk about, from their perspective, like, pole access and whatever. And we ended up doing this great panel together with two of her recipients, as well as NTCA, I think, we created this amazing dialogue between the state broadband offices and the utilities companies, and hearing like a raised understanding on both parties about what the challenges are, the realities when you are going to a utility company whose primary reason for being is providing electricity or some utility, and really heard some dialogue that was very constructive about initiatives on things like workforce development that wouldn't be maybe your top of mind thing of what could help solve this problem. But so, I think that the challenges are out there. The other thing I think timing wise that is only accelerating in terms of improvements in broadband permitting is that I mentioned before the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, they were able to provide extra funding to land managing agencies. One of the things that we hear, like some of these remote forests and BLM lands and what have you, right? Somebody retires and they can't get somebody out there in 5 minutes to take that person's position. And so the Permitting Council has funded some the kind of like triage permitting troops. The Forest Service has a great one, and centralized broadband permitting. So you're now going to, with Forest Service, a broadband permitting website, and the broadband team, the national broadband team, knows about it. They can do some of the interface, make sure that the local forest is going to be prepared for you. With the Forest Service, we also I'll just promote this, executed a memorandum of understanding with them to allow us to be lead for Section 106 and use that program comment, as I mentioned. So, I think for middle mile, we've got like a lot of great problem solvers. They're not maximally able to take advantage of some of these improvements, but I'm like really hopeful that we've been able to do a lot of work that's going to make it easier for BEAD for sure.
Okay, that's really great to know that full context. All right, so I'm going to just switch gears just a little bit and go to the latest and greatest report on permitting success. So this was a large effort. We spent a whole day with a very diverse and broad number of stakeholders who, from industry to cities, and this was all brought together by Gigi Sohn and a fellow trade association, and sponsored by some of our members. And it led to this wonderful report that the Benton Institute released. And Neelan did put a link to this report. So if you've not seen this, I highly recommend it. Jill's team, Jill sat at the table with us. I mean, we were there the whole day. I can't possibly describe, and there were a lot of detailed conversations, and while there was a lot of agreement, there were disagreements too, right? But what I really liked about that day is that it did center around, well, what are some solutions that we're hearing? And there have been a lot of municipalities that have found some good solutions to help the industry across the board really achieve faster and more affordable infrastructure deployment. And so, kudos for Benton for putting out this report that goes through several different recommendations and also provides examples. And Jill's team offered to some local permitting slides that I think really kind of help capture a lot of the issues that, we're hearing as we're working through these things. So one of the first recommendations that's made in this report is really having early and often communications between the industry and with the permitting agencies that they need to obtain their permits from. And while this was a local focus, I mean, I think this would really apply across the board, right? Is you really want to have those ongoing conversations. You want to be sure that the agencies know what's coming and what it is that your project is going to do. So, Jill, I wanted to get your perspective on this particular recommendation. How do you see this part playing out? Do you see some results already from these types of conversations that are happening, and getting prepared for these projects? And do you have any insight or further recommendations for us that we need to be considering?
So yeah, like one of the things that makes permitting so interesting, but also so challenging, right, is all the variables. And so I would say a couple different things. We have been working very closely with many of the state broadband offices. One of the SPOs that we met with recently was Nevada. And one of the things that I was really, really amazed by is the extent to which that state broadband office actually has gone out to every county and started talking to them about what was coming, and also to the tribal communities in the state.
Mhm.
They actually have a questionnaire that they have circulated and built these, they call them BATs, these local groups of broadband stakeholders, so that they are promoting the fact that this is coming. They're getting people excited about it. And as they get into the stage where they will be having sub award process and proposals, they've they've started the dialogue, right, with the local people. And I think one of the things we heard quite a bit is that some of the particularly local communities are really under-resourced, right? There are volunteers who are on doing the permitting, in some cases the mayors or other elected officials. And so having a heads up, and particularly at a time when there's other infrastructure that's being funded, I think we heard a lot about it sure would be better if we could have maybe expanded this mapping ability so that we knew if there was federal funding ripping up a road, we could have been building the broadband into it there. But I think this early contact, we also had in the summit meeting some developers there who had really great experiences, I would say best practices of really developing these kind of master agreements, where they went through like all of the aspects of what they would be doing, were very transparent, met with the communities. And so they kind of worked it all out. So there weren't a lot of surprises. The other thing I would say is that as I've gone out into individual states, one that has really impressed me is Arkansas put together very quickly a permitting task force. And I was down there for their BEAD summit, but they also did their first task force meeting. The most vocal person in that room was actually their state 811 representative, which surprised me. But what I learned was that as the SBO had been doing other broadband deployments funded by other programs, this 811 office kept getting all these calls. So they were hearing indirectly about broadband. And they called up and said, look, can we work with you? We know people in all of the 75 counties in the state, and we can make it much easier for you to get in there. And very recently, I was in Alabama, and there was a panel of representatives from small towns like Dothan. And they were all saying, like, if you're going to come in and do business in our town, we want to know who you are. So I think you're exactly right. Angie, one of the other things I would say is another thing our team did, we co-hosted a federal broadband permitting summit in July with the Bureau of Land Management. And we had 13 different federal agencies who presented on their permit processes and requirements. We taped all of those presentations. We had about 150 people there in person. It was in Phoenix. But all of those presentations are taped and on our permitting webpage. So if you're going to be applying for, a Bureau of Reclamation permit or something like that, you can go on our website, watch like a half an hour, 40-minute presentation, you have the deck and materials. But consistently, every agency said, if you can talk to us early, you're going to save both of us so much time.
Yeah, it's so important to keep that in mind. I'm getting a little feedback. Do you hear the feedback? Okay, maybe it's just me. It might just be my microphone. So, you made a couple points there that I also just wanted to highlight, and that is sometimes the lack of resources. There may be alternatives, and the permitting report that Benton put together also highlights that where uh, there have been opportunities to combine resources to help kind of across the board with a number of towns and cities achieve what they want to do. And some cities have accepted some additional resources from the private sector to help fill gaps so that they can hire a consultant where they have some lack of employee resources. So there are a number of examples that the report points out and includes, and I think you're right, having these master agreements that people can borrow from. One of the things that we've heard recently from our members is those who have been in markets for a while maybe giving up providing certain types of services that the franchise is based on, for example, video, and really moving to a broadband only model. And so having these kinds of master agreements in situations where you can see, okay, well, how did that town handle it where, you know, it's not a cable operator anymore, it's now just a broadband provider, right? And how do we transition the franchise fees, et cetera? I think those examples are all really great to be thinking about and sharing with each other just to help cities and towns who haven't encountered it yet and understand this is how other places have dealt with it. So that's really fantastic. Okay, so one of the other major findings of this report, they recommend, and I know this can sometimes be a challenge, but having information available online, as you all are already doing, and being able to accept electronic submissions, using e-permitting portals, providing regular updates on status of applications. What are you seeing on the ground in terms of government preparedness in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is increasing. I think that as we heard that day, I think there is a lot of concern for some of the smaller and more rural communities that just before didn't have that high permitting demand to generate the need to develop an online system, that it's out there. And I think we heard too that some of these localities have challenges because one of their primary responsibilities is to ensure safety
Mhm.
for workers, and to ensure that to the extent that there are utilities that are already in the ground, that a new deployment isn't going to disturb those. And yet there aren't really, the 21st century hasn't fully come in terms of
Yeah.
digitizing all those resources and having access to mapped resources. And so I think one of the things that we heard is, to the extent that folks who are going into these areas are creating digital models for what they're constructing, if you can leave those behind, particularly where they're identifying existing utilities, that's really going to help them out. I feel like in this past year of work, I it kind of came at a time after Middle Mile was funded and
Mhm.
TBCP1 was funded. TBCP2 is about to be funded, and of course BEAD. So I don't have a lot of like boots on the ground experience, but I think that the work that Benton did to bring the right people into the table. So as you mentioned, there were some conversations where industry's perspective and the local government perspective were in conflict. And I think that was helpful for them to talk it through. But I know I learned things about some of the things that NTIA has been putting out as quote unquote like best practices. So there was a representative there on behalf of mayors, and he was talking about how many smaller communities feel that they were burned by dig once, that they built a lot of additional capacity into their infrastructure. And
Mhm.
then as people have come to request permits to build things out, they don't want to go into somebody else's conduit or into that.
Really?
That really
Yeah.
that really surprised me. I don't know if you were there, if that was a
I wasn't there
subgroup.
for, we did break up into smaller groups, so I wasn't part of that conversation, but that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
because yeah, you figured, you have enough conduit, you build a large enough conduit, then you can just string fiber through it. It's less expensive than having to bury your own conduit. So that's the first time I've ever heard that. That was
it was,
some folks
I
don't want to
have,
share other people's conduit.
and I have someone who's looking into that, like the whys and
Mhm.
the wheres of it. But I think some things like that, and were really, really eye-opening. There was another person who was participating that day from a rural county in Illinois who was talking about how frequently the farmers in her county are having their drain tiles sliced open by broadband. And so it was a real issue that their local farm bureau had to grapple with. And they decided, knowing that there was all of this additional infrastructure coming, to develop a master agreement that addresses that, and to really to put some more both shine some light on the issue, but also to put some tools into place so that everybody knows, like, that it's out there, and it's not something like utility issues that people are dealing with after the fact as a problem, but it can be planned in advance.
Yes. And the sharing of information is just so important, right? That's like one agency finds out something, sharing that across the board with all the agencies to share with the industry, I think would be a wonderful opportunity to help build the partnership so that we have a great working relationship. And ultimately, the ISPs are there because they want to serve the customers. And so they certainly don't want farmers to be upset that their land has been disturbed or their property's been disturbed in such a way that it's counterproductive to the overall partnership that ISPs are looking to have with the communities. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts for us on what we as the competitive industry could be doing to further these conversations?
I really appreciate this opportunity, creating a forum, creating the forum last week, and inviting Sarah. I feel like one of the things that I love about my job is, and it scares me too, is that I learn something new every time I go to talk to someone or go out to a state and see what they're doing and how they're implementing. I think in terms of the message that I think the message that really needs to be out there is that there are a lot of tools. We have been doing a lot of work to put the tools out there. I think on some of the environmental issues that I was talking about, like, we are cranking out all these efficiencies and so forth. The extent to which folks who are going to be constructing these networks are aware of them is going to be really important. There's going to be full employment for environmental consultants, and some of them are not going to be like that tuned into the broadband space. So we're trying to push the word out about what these efficiencies and these tools are, but the mapping tool, planning the smartest project that you can, like you're talking about on the local front, trying to start conversations early, whether it's with municipalities or federal agencies or whatever, and using the mapping tools that can help you identify what those considerations are and to think about deployment. We adopted the programmatic environmental impact statements that the First Responder Network Authority did in every state and territory to look at the types of broadband infrastructure and the potential environmental impacts so that we can use those in NEPA to make NEPA go faster. But one of the things that's interesting is that from when those were done in 2017 to today, really deployment methods aren't that different, right? It's like we have so much information. We know the dots on the map, the broadband serviceable locations where infrastructure has to get to, where connections have to be made. We know through all these layers in our map what the environmental considerations are. We know how we're going to do it. So we should be able to, by starting early and starting the conversations early, work smarter than we ever have in other federally funded broadband programs.
Well, great. Thank you, Jill, for spending a good hour with us today. We really do appreciate it. And to those who attended, thank you for taking the time. We will make the slides available to you. And as you heard Jill, they have an open door policy. So if you want to meet with her and her team, you want to, propose them to come, host them to come out and see what it is that you're doing. I'm sure she'd be very happy to take those types of invitations and under consideration. So again, thank you so much, Jill. Really do appreciate your time and all the hard work that you and your team are doing.